Good evening, everybody. We have this course starting today, and we appreciate that you have joined us. We look forward to more people joining, but we don't want to delay the start. And so, as you know, Professor Trevor Monroe is delivering this course, and it should be a very interesting course on democracy in Jamaica. Very current issues. And as usual, Trevor is an excellent presenter who will stimulate us in terms of what is going on and what can be done with regard to strengthening democracy. So without any further delay, I'm going to invite Trevor to start.
Thank you very much, Joe, for those short and kind words. Ladies and gentlemen, sisters and brothers online, good afternoon. May I welcome you to this lecture presentation, and at the same time apologize sincerely for the very short notice which many of you received regarding this event. We also hope that the rain next week, when we have our second lecture presentation, will be less torrential and allow some more of you to be present here. Allow me also to acknowledge the support of the European Union, which accepted NIA's proposal 2 years ago to sponsor this project. The project is strengthening civil society organizations to impact democracy and human rights in Jamaica. Allow me also to express sincere appreciation to the leadership of St. Michael's Seminary and Theological College. Excuse me. Over the past many months, I've been collaborating with NIA in hosting various events implementing this project. I'm particularly pleased that they readily made St. Michael's facilities available as a hub, a meeting place, so to speak, a home for developing greater civil society collaboration and cooperation in Jamaica. It is against this background that St. Michael's Principal Deacon Ronnie Thaites and Dean of Studies, Deacon Peter Espute, and Chairman of the Board, invited me to do a series of lectures under the theme, Strengths and Challenges to Democracy in Jamaica. These presentations would, as it were, serve two purposes. One is to help raise public awareness of important issues, particularly at this time, related to democracy and human rights, and at the same time incorporate these lectures as one of St. Michael's short courses. May I, in passing, commend St. Michael's for this initiative. A secular course such as this, alongside similar short courses, broadens the offerings available to St. Michael's students and to the public, beyond theological and scriptural studies, important as those are. This evening, our first lecture in the series will be providing primarily an overview of the current state of democracy globally and of its electoral foundations in Jamaica. Future lectures, next week and the week after and the week after, shall focus more specifically on three things. One, the significant challenges facing Jamaica's democracy. Two, what needs to be done to cope with these challenges? And how are we as a people, and more particularly civil society bodies, might act to better cope and to better deal with these significant challenges? First, we begin with basics. A short working definition of democracy, the shortest and most classical. democracy means people rule or people power. The word itself is a combination of two Greek words, demos, meaning people, and kratia, meaning rule or power. The foundation of democracy, therefore, is the right and the capacity of a people to take decisions affecting their own lives and to select those who shall do so, and to remove them when necessary. The foundation of democracy is therefore the right to vote in fair and free elections. In modern times, you should note that this right is set out in Article 21 of the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights. And here I quote, "Everyone has the right to take part in the government of his country, directly or through chosen representatives. Everyone has the right to equal access to public service in his country." Note that, please, equal access to public service in his country. And Article 21 continues, "The will of the people shall be the basis of the authority of government. This will shall be expressed in periodic and genuine elections, which shall be by universal and equal suffrage, and shall be held by secret vote or by equivalent free voting procedures." End of quote. This declaration was initially aspirational, an aspirational document. It was signed in 1948 and became a component of a legally binding foundational treaty. And that treaty is the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. This treaty has now been ratified by 175 states since 1976. Let me note, however, at the very onset, that while free and fair elections to choose and remove governments are the base, the foundation of democracy, like any foundation of any building, the one we are in now, the foundation does not constitute the entire structure. To put it another way, without the foundation, there's nothing on which the building can rest. Equally and conversely, this foundation by itself is of limited use without the building, without an appropriate structure set on it. Hence, on the basis of elections, the foundation of democracy requires much more. It requires the people, through various structures and processes and institutions, to hold those in power accountable in between elections, and to ensure that the people's rights are being upheld and not abused. Since 2015, these rights, the people's rights universally, are now embraced in 17 Sustainable Development Goals adopted by all member states of the United Nations. And these include the right to decent work, gender equality, quality education, and so on. So we must have the base, strong foundation in free and fair elections, and we must have the structure to make elections meaningful in defending, enlarging the rights of the people and not allowing them to be abused. With this understanding, we may now turn to the current condition globally, the overall state of democracy in today's world. I thought that given the historical origin and continuing commitment to spread the gospel in accordance with the Roman Catholic tradition, through the pursuit of truth and justice, may I be permitted to introduce a considered reflection, in fact, two considered reflections, one on the part of the late head of the Catholic Church, Pope Francis, and the other by the current Pope, Pope Leo XIV. Pope Francis was reflecting on democracy on the occasion of the 50th Social Week of Italian Catholics in July of 2024. And here's what he said. Quotes, "It is evident that democracy is not in good health in today's world. This concerns and worries us because the well-being of mankind is at stake. The very word democracy does not simply coincide with the vote of the people. I am concerned about the decline in the number of people voting. It requires creating the conditions that allow everyone to express themselves and participate." Pope Francis continued, "Participation cannot be improvised. It is learned from childhood. Democracy always requires the transition from partisanship to participation, from cheering to dialogue." End of quotes. Then we come to the comment recently made. In fact, brothers and sisters, ladies and gentlemen, on April the 9th, by the current Pope Leo XIV. Leo XIV, in his message to participants in the plenary of the Pontifical Academy of the Social Sciences, made these comments. And here I quote, "Authentic democracy," not the adjective, as distinct from improvised or false democracy, far from being a mere procedure, recognizes the dignity of every person, calls each citizen to participate responsibly in the pursuit of the common good. He continued, "Democracy remains healthy, rooted on the moral law. Lacking this foundation, democracy becomes either majority tyranny or a mask for domination and dominance of economic and technological elites." Most interesting observations. Some years before these reflections of the late Pope and the current Pope, based on the application, as it were, on theology and scripture to the current changes and the current reality in the world, secular authorities, regional organizations, and academic institutions made assessments of the state of democracy in today's world. In 2021, it was at the joint special session of the committee preparing for the 9th Congress of the Organization of American States, the OAS, that the insightful concept of, quotes, democratic recession was adopted to depict failing health, different degrees of decline and signs of decay in democracies in our hemisphere and beyond. Even before this conceptualization of democratic recession was adopted, surveys in the OECD countries, the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development, from 2019 indicated, sisters and brothers, that only 45% of people had confidence in the performance of democratic institutions. A year after, in 2020, the Institute of Democracy at Cambridge University concluded from a global analysis that there then existed the highest level of dissatisfaction with democracy since the 1990s. Along the same lines, over the last 2 years, 4 leading global academic civil society institutions have each independently come with different methodologies to a similar conclusion. And that similar conclusion is worth noting in this first lecture and presentation. Namely, democracy is in decline, and the trend to authoritarianism inside of democratic states and outside of democratic states, with and without elections, is growing to alarming proportions and must be resisted. Allow me to introduce you to elements in each of these 4 very important and authoritative reports. The first one, the V Democracy Report of 2026, published by the V Democracy Institute Political Science Department at the University of Gothenburg in Sweden. They state that the number of autocracies, elected autocracies and unelected, for the first time is 92, more than 20 years, for the first time in more than 20 years, exceeding the number of democracies, which stands at 87. In the V Democracy 2026 report, released only 4 weeks ago, the institution, after careful studying the utilization literally of hundreds of data points, concluded that, and here I quote again, democratic backsliding has reached traditional Western democracies. Continuing the quote, that the US is experiencing a rapid and aggressive concentration of power in the presidency. And that while the electoral, still quoting, the electoral component of democracy remains stable for now. Their words, not mine. The electoral component of democracy remains stable for now. The speed with which American democracy is currently dismantled is unprecedented in modern history. Overall, the V Democracy 2026 report concludes, and here I quote, the USA loses its long-term status as a liberal democracy for the first time in 50 years, and is now classified as, quotes, an electoral democracy, end of quotes. Loses its status as a liberal democracy for the first time in over 50 years, and is now classified as an electoral democracy. Another organization, the International Institute of Democracy and Electoral Assistance noted in their 2024 report that the percentage of voter turnout has declined in all regions and has fallen by 10% globally in the last 15 years. Third institution I want to cite for you, Freedom House, coming out of the United States, in their report, notes that political rights and civil liberties have deteriorated in 60 countries and improved in only 34. And for almost 20 consecutive years, more countries have declined than improved. Lastly, the Bertelsmann Institute, a private foundation based in Germany, in its 2024 report found, quotes, in parts of Latin America and the Caribbean, continuing downward drift in the quality of democracy. The period proved to be the most autocratic in the region since the biennial reports of the Bertelsmann Institute were commenced in 2006. Overall, therefore, my brothers and sisters, the erosion of human rights and civil liberties, deteriorating quality of elections, and declining levels of confidence in all regions, with the exception of Northern European Scandinavian states, leaves little doubt that the world is currently experiencing a global recession. What then, we ask ourselves, is the underlying factor accounting for this recession? The widely respected Edelman Trust puts it in this way in one of their most recent reports. And here I quote, "There is a growing sense of inequity and unfairness in the system." End of quotes. The major element underlying this sense of inequity is reflected as early as 10 years ago in Transparency International's 2014 Global Corruption Barometer. That 2014 study surveyed the views of 114,000 people in 107 countries around the world, including Jamaica. The question was asked, these are the exact words, to what extent is government run by a few big interests looking out for themselves? End of quotes. That was the question asked in those 107 countries of 114,000 people, representative samples. The majority, 54% of the sample across those countries answered to a large extent or entirely. To a large extent or entirely, government is run by a few big interests looking out for themselves. In the US, it was 64%. In the UK, 60%. In Jamaica at that time, 54%. Scandinavian countries were the only countries in which a majority felt that this was not the case. I leave it to your imagination where those percentages would be if that survey was redone at the present time. The sentiment is not difficult to explain. Hard data and lived experience underpins this opinion. Data demonstrating widening inequality within most democracies in respect not only of income, but as well of access to quality education, adequate health care, food security, and other necessities. In fact, when you have time, you should take a look at a report done by Oxfam and Development Finance International. It's called The Commitment to Reduce Inequality, and it studies countries around the world, over 150. And the Commitment to Reduce Inequality Index found 2024 that 4 out of 5 countries were cutting areas of spending in worsening the gap between rich and poor. And particularly, they found attitudes of governments to public services and equality of access to health, education, was one of the major contributors to this widening gap. Then, of course, the World Economic Forum in 2026, not too long ago, found that a tiny group of about 500 in this globe of 7-8 billion, that tiny group of 500 controlled 60 trillion, not billion, trillion, I don't even know how many knots that is, of wealth. In fact, the World Economic Forum, in which, of course, many of these people attended, found that the top 0.001%, that's 0.001% of the world's population, control 3 times more wealth than the bottom 50% combined. Just think of that. It is this deepening perception of inequity accompanying the growing reality in democratic systems, which is raising and increasing doubts in so many democratic countries about the capacity of democratic institutions and processes to close the widening gap and to uplift the living standards of the majority. At the very same time, and for the same reasons, this reality of doubt, of distrust, of skepticism, of lack of confidence renders increasing numbers of the disadvantaged populace to be inclined, to be vulnerable to authoritarian appeals and dictatorial demagogues wearing democratic garb. Leave it to me, they say, to fix your problems, to uplift your standard of living. Look how long we've been trying. Voting one side, moving them out, putting in another side, and you still are in a relative state of inequity. Forget these elections which are getting you nowhere, the demagogue says. Voting and all those other checks and balances. Let the parliament be my tool. Don't talk about checks and balances. Look how long we've been trying them and nothing has changed. Time, the authoritarian autocrat will say, give me the power to make the change. forget about transparency and accountability and these highfalutin terms. And that, sisters and brothers, that kind of appeal in recent elections across the world, with very few exceptions, Hungary being one recently, is resonating, and persons are moving in the direction of not seeing the importance of maintaining checks and balances to ensure that ultimately your interests, the majority's interests, will be enhanced. So that's a global picture. The question now arises, moving from the global to the regional, and ultimately to our situation, to what extent is democracy in Jamaica, and more widely, among CARICOM countries, experiencing this global democratic recession? To what extent are we experiencing democratic backsliding, now characterizing so many democratic states? May I start with my conclusion, with my short answer, which shall be developed over the next 3 lectures. Our democracy is backsliding, but we in Jamaica are not, repeat, not, in a democratic recession. In explaining the basis of this conclusion, let us look at what we have described and what is in fact the foundation of democracy, namely free and fair elections. Thereafter, we shall look at the structures, institutions, and processes which constitute the building, the democratic building on this foundation, and which facilitates serving the people's interests. Regarding the region, I want to concur with an assessment of my former research assistant and now distinguished head of the Department of Government at UWI-Mona, Dr. Lisa Vassiani. Recently, Lisa presented at a seminar and published the summary of her paper in the Jamaica Gleaner. You may take a look on it. It's March 22nd, 2026 in the Gleaner. And the paper was entitled, quote, Caribbean Ballots in a Geopolitical Age, end of quotes. I want to cite and endorse one of Lisa's conclusions. She said, for decades, the Caribbean has been justly celebrated as one of the global South's most electorally stable regions. That reputation remains in the aftermath of the 2025-2026 electoral cycle. Elections were held within the prescribed time, results were accepted, and Lisa continues, power was peacefully transferred when required. These are core features of electoral democracy. End of quotes. I would add, even in this regional company, Jamaica stands out hitherto as one of the most stable and enduring democracies, regionally and globally. It was Jamaica, the Jamaican people, first in the region and among the first in the world ahead of many mature democracies, including the United States and others that successfully fought for and won universal adult suffrage, the right of every adult to vote. Remind ourselves, that was in 1944, 4 years before this right was recognized in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Subsequently, since 1944, for the 81 years completed since then, at some points with cracks in the foundation, let us be clear, cracks now largely repaired, Jamaica has held relatively free and fair elections. The competitive character of these elections is reflected in the fact that of the 18 contested general elections, each parliamentary party has won 9 of the 18. On several occasions, therefore, the governing party has given up office and the opposition taken over the reins of government peacefully. More significantly, let us not forget, as we feel legitimately dissatisfied at too much of what's going on, let us be balanced and recognize that on 3 occasions, 2007, 2016, 2025, the victorious party in the elections won by a popular vote majority of less than 1.5% of the voting electorate. Yet even with these narrow margins, there were no riots, like happened in the United States in 2021. The electorate accepted the results, and the elected government took power peacefully. I think many of us take this for granted. But lest we do, may I ask you to consider experience wider afield. In 2024, a year with an unusually large number of elections globally, there were over 160 protest riots relating to many of those elections. As the Carnegie Global Protest Tracker concluded from their study of these incidents, and here I quote, citizens' anger over the organizing and over the outcome of these votes stood out as a driving factor. No such in Jamaica. Overall, therefore, despite Jamaica coming to the edge of civil war, looking over the precipice and pulling back in the 1970s, there are less than a handful of countries among the 180 in the entire world which have held contested elections where we have vigorous campaigns and changes of government, not only without the riots of which we see characterizing too many countries, but subsequently without one-party rule, which happened in so many African states that got independence about the same time as we did, without military takeover, without civil war, that happened in so many countries that again got independence around our time. Ceylon or Sri Lanka, for example. Without assassinations of political leaders, as happened in the largest democracy in the world, India, as happened in the United States, President Kennedy. And without the assassination of champions of civil society and of civil rights, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X in the United States comes to mind. So we say the electoral foundations of democracy in Jamaica remain strong, tried and tested. But as we shall see, by no means perfect, in need of further consolidation and not to be taken for granted. There's so many countries where the foundations are strong, but for many reasons, not least of all complacency in the citizens, those foundations gave rise to what is appropriate to describe as executive dictatorship rather than liberal democracy. Equally important, however, as the foundation of free and fair elections, are elements set on this foundation which remain strong in terms of political rights and civil liberties. Jamaica consistently scores 80 out of 100 on Freedom House's scale and is consistently put in the category free as distinct from partly free. Similarly, and very importantly, to be guarded and watched in respect of freedom of the press, one of the more important infrastructures of democracy. Jamaica consistently ranks in the top 15% of 180 countries globally, and is currently the highest ranked in the Caribbean. Not to be taken for granted. Nevertheless, sisters and brothers, we must note and shall discuss in coming lectures the significant challenges facing this electoral foundation, and far more so, the significant challenges facing democratic structures, institutions, and processes which are designed to hold power to account, which are designed to keep the public, you and I, engaged, which are designed to facilitate citizen participation and information, as well as institutions, organizations, and processes designed to prevent, political science term, state capture, capture of government institutions, regulatory bodies, capture of candidates, even capture of the parliament by a minority of wealthy and connected individuals. And that shall be the subject of our second, third, and fourth lectures, because on the basis of the global picture, the major lesson to be learned: do not allow backsliding to continue and to become democratic recession, as too often happens, a democratic recession with electoral garb. So I thank you for your attention this afternoon. Any concerns, questions you may wish to raise, I'll be happy to respond to, but I shall look forward to seeing you online and otherwise next week, Wednesday, same time, 5:30, following Wednesday, and the Wednesday thereafter as well. Thank you very much for your attentiveness. Thank you. I invite your questions and comments, of course.
Well, good evening, Prof. Wow, I don't have my webcam attached to this laptop, so I want to apologize for not being able to switch on. But that's just a limitation of this laptop. If I really wanted to thank you, I've really I'm coming with a need to find some hope because there are things that have happened recently that have really challenged me. And I just wanted to share one in particular with you.
Please.
2 months ago, thereabouts, when you made a comment about unfairness and inequity in the system. And I have to tell you the truth, if I were made prime minister tomorrow, one of the things I would want to really change is the extent to which I think the system is unfair. And it manifests in so many different ways. But about 2 months ago, I had an experience that I really found heartrending. And this is what came out of the Auditor General's report, the real-time audit that shared with us how things were going with the hurricane recovery. And one of the things that we discovered had to do with the spending of monies on that 200 Starlink devices. And whereas that in and of itself, Prof, was not particularly startling as Auditor General reports go, what I have not been able to wrap my head around is how the media, how citizens, how the opposition, how what I would call all the watchdogs in the society, in our democracy, responded to the position of a senior cabinet member. So a senior cabinet member did not take the approach that most cabinet members do when they find themselves the unfortunate subjects of an Auditor General's findings, which is always adverse. I mean, an AG, if you find yourself in an Auditor General's report, it's probably adverse, right? That senior cabinet member didn't speak of, I am very sorry for what happened. And I will do the best I can going forward, especially now that I've been sensitized or resensitized to a matter pertaining to emergency procedures and how I could have handled this differently. I'm trying to get myself on. Hi, Prof. Yes, I managed to find a webcam to stick it in. What we were told by a senior cabinet member is that, first of all, the Auditor General was challenged as not really knowing what she was doing. And secondly, but more importantly, after a couple of interviews, I cannot get out of my mind when there was the opening of Parliament and that particular senior cabinet minister was exiting, and a journalist asked a question again about the 200 Starlink devices that were improperly procured. And a senior cabinet member who is in charge of the process of supervising and superintending billions of dollars of hurricane, recovery spent, standing outside, Prof, the George William Gordon House, having just opened the Parliament, looked in the camera and said to the journalists and the people of Jamaica, the government, I don't know if it's the government or the people, but whether or not, whichever of the two it is, cannot expect me to procure goods in circumstances like these using normal procurement procedures. Jamaica needs emergency procurement procedures. Now, Prof, emergency procurement procedures have existed. I left government 20 years ago, long before that. And while he's saying that, milling around him, opposition coming out, cabinet members coming out, everybody in the Parliament of Jamaica knows that that is not true. And what I'm saying to you is that I think we must just declare that cabinet is not equal before the law. If a senior cabinet member such as Mr. Vaz could get away with saying to Jamaica, not only have I not broken the law, but that law does not exist. And I am sharing it with you, Prof, and the rest of the attendees, because it's not so much Minister Vaz that is concerning, though that is the case. It is the response from the watchdogs in our society. A democracy needs about 5 of them, and they're all here. And I've been trying to wrap my head, Prof, around how it is that nothing has come from a statement such as that from an opposition. The media hasn't treated with it. To be honest with you, civil society hasn't done much with it. And I'm using it a little bit as a thermometer for where our democracy is. And I'm asking you the question, have I made much ado about nothing? And am I making a mountain out of a molehill?
Absolutely not, Janet, and so happy to see you. And you keep up your good work and the JAM friends as well. These are going to be issues that we're really going to be tackling head on in the next lecture. But in the meantime,
Okay.
I'll say the following. First of all, Cabinet. What we have discerned over the years, one of the critical institutions, collective responsibility to the Parliament, is that while they are collectively responsible, there are clearly individuals on a spectrum. Some who are more open to, willing to accommodate the norms of democratic governance or accountability and being taken to task by colleagues when they do wrong. In fact, you should recall, if my memory serves me right, in the last 30 years or so, there have been 15 cabinet ministers, almost equally on both sides, who have had to resign and relinquish office because of one or another impropriety or inappropriate conduct. That depends a lot on two things. One, the Prime Minister, who is the head, as you know, of the executive and the cabinet. And two, it depends on the outcry from civil society and also members of Parliament themselves and other members of the cabinet who might do so privately. Which leads me to my next observation. What I have discerned, and I'm sure you would have seen it too, is that the temperature of our citizens and of our different organizations varies over time. Sometimes our people get very hot and they get very concerned, and their frustration leads them to take action, whether that action is to flood the media or to flood the streets, as we saw in 1999, when the then government, through the Minister of Finance, sought to raise significantly the tax on fuel. And the people said no. And across the island, largely, or to some extent, stimulated by the then opposition, took to the streets to the point where the then Prime Minister had to appoint a special committee. This is 1999, on which I happened to serve as in the Senate at the time as vice chairman. And we met for an entire weekend. And we came out with a proposal that that tax had to be cut in half. And it was. So what we're seeing is that when the people are relatively quiet, either through their organizations and that's civil society, the various professional associations, the Bar Association, the Law Society, medical and other associations, the trade unions, when they remain relatively quiescent and their members relatively unconcerned, what we find is that this happens for a number of reasons. People are concerned in making two ends meet themselves, not have time for nothing else. Or I'm afraid that if they come out, they're going to lose a job, or they're not going to get promotion. Or third, why should I get involved at all? I really won't, deal with my own situations and not change.
Right.
And when you get those three together, you get waves of high engagement followed by troughs of decline. And I always remember, Janet, when I think of Jamaica and the history from the 1930s till now, I think of the time when I'm on the beach, and maybe you are there sometimes, and you see waves, and some waves are crashed on the shore. 3 hours later, the calmest sea you ever see.
Right.
What I'm encouraging me and other members of civil society don't take the calm with the Jamaican people. They take long sometimes to come to realization that they have to do something. But when they stand up, things happen. And there's so many examples of this, which I'll try to recall for us in future elections, in future lectures. One of them, I think, comes to mind right away. This would have been in 2018. Yes. It was in February of 2018 when there was a vacancy for the position of Chief Justice. And the Prime Minister took the view that somebody, in this case, the current Chief Justice, Sykes, should be appointed to act. But to act with no criteria for appointment and no indication of how long. And I remember in that February, the Bar Association, the various professional societies, NIA and others said, no, this is not right. This is breaching the separation of powers, which is such a bulwark for democracy. Executive must not interfere with the independence of the judiciary and the legislature as well. One thing happened then that I commend to all of us. For the first time in Jamaica's history, there's a long history we have, every single judge, then people who know really do things like go on strike, well, I didn't call it a strike, but all 97 of them, instead of going to court, went to a meeting. And out of that meeting came a declaration of what the independence of the judiciary means and what the separation of powers must be preserved. And the Prime Minister, the Chief Justice was appointed within weeks of being told to act. So, cut a long story short, the reference you make to the ministers have behaved inappropriately in the past and didn't keep the work. For the current time, this minister appears to be keeping the work. Secondly, at that time, in those occasions, both prime ministers on both sides of the aisle asked them to leave. And this prime minister that we have now has asked many ministers to leave, especially in his first dispensation between 2016 and 2020. And thirdly, the concerns of the people were more evident on those occasions than they are now. But I believe that the seeds that you are planting and that NIA is planting and that the international development agencies have supported us in funding to make sure that their assistance to Jamaica and the Jamaican people doesn't go into the wrong pockets, that those seeds are planted and they will germinate. But they will germinate in their own time. Not because we want them to come earlier. We just need to keep fertilizing, and ultimately we will see the change. And we're going to talk a little bit about the circumstances. What is it that we need to be doing when we go through the serious challenges, including the accountability issues? I mean, I am told, I'm not on social media as you are, but when one member of parliament, Tuesday, or was it, yes, performed in the way that an MP ought to, by critically analyzing one of the most important bills now before the House of Representatives, the NIA bill. And the opposition was clinical, not just opposing for opposing's sake, but pointing out some of the weaknesses and what needs to be done. And a member of the governing side provided a similar level of analysis and then said that this bill needs to be reworked. There was astonishment on the government side. They don't understand, or they choose not to understand, what the role of the parliamentarian is in our constitution, to make law for the peace, order, and good government, not to make law in accordance with what the party tell you. And there's no storm of denunciation of this particular backbencher for daring to speak the truth in relation to the bill. So these episodes are being noted. Whenever we see somebody stand up like that, we need to congratulate them, whatever side they're on, as you normally do. So I think you're not making a mountain out of a molehill. You're bringing to public attention a serious issue, which has to be dealt with more vociferously and not forgotten. So thank you for that, Danny.
Thank you, Prof.
Any other questions, concerns, comments?
But if I can just say, Prof, I really haven't had an opportunity as yet to hear what Member Malahoo Forth said. But I do want to share with everybody here that it is very worthwhile and it's very easy to find on PBCJ. I have never forgotten the date. It is the 29th of September, 2020, when the Prime Minister of Jamaica explained something that I had only learned maybe about 2 years before. He was explaining what is the role of the backbencher. And he was explaining that it is not, and his words were, it is not just the purview of the opposition to hold the government to account, to review and to examine the government's decisions and actions. He pointed out that the person sitting behind him, Prof, that too is their job and their responsibility. And he said he didn't want his members behind him just banging the benches. But he wanted a parliament that would function in the way it was designed to. I would encourage everyone to listen, because what Member Malahoo Forth did is precisely what the Prime Minister says he wants to see more of. So don't take it from me, don't take it from Prof, take it from the Prime Minister's own commitment in terms of what he wants to see. So I just thought I would share that.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought it out, because there's so much of what the Prime Minister said that we need to sometimes remind him of, but remind others as well. And one of the ones I recall is his inaugural speech in 2016, which, and I'll never forget, because it's so much a part of what we're going to be talking about in these lectures. He said at the time, in almost as many words, a significant section of Jamaican people have lost confidence in our system. They want to see action, not more words, to restore trust. Prime Minister Holness. So when actions are taken to restore trust and confidence, that includes most of all keeping promises made, not make them the electoral slogans, but keep the promises made. We need to commend, and when Prime Minister acts inconsistently, or anyone else, we need to remind them, look, these are human traits. Sometimes you don't remember what you said, or you don't internalize the critical importance of that. Jamaican people want to see action to restore trust, not just words. And again, in 2020, the speech to which I think you're referring, he reminded the ministers, you are not kings and queens. In fact, that's a very prophetic statement in respect of what's going on in the United States now. You're not kings and queens. You're there to serve the people, to show respect, and as you pointed out, not to bang the desk if you see something that you don't agree with because you're on the side of the government, and similarly applies to the opposition. Speak independently and truthfully in the interest of good government in Jamaica. And that's one of the things we're going to be talking about. How do we encourage, how do we ensure that during this relative period of calm, relative period of quiescence, relative period of ignoring what you just pointed out to us, how do we behave in a way to shorten that period and to make certain that the inevitable time, because I think it's ultimately going to happen, but that it comes as soon as it can and not waiting till eternity. So thank you again for reminding us of that particular statement.
I know you'll be developing a lot in coming Wednesdays regarding the local situation, but I wanted to ask what your view is on whether there is now a sort of hit back against the autocracies from the elections in Hungary and how the landslide rejection of Orban is interpreted.
That rejection has ignited much hope across the democratic world, in particular citizens who are concerned that the autocracy disguised is going to be inevitable and also lasting forever. And what that shows, Joe, perhaps that the autocrat has to go to certain extremes or to touch a particular corner of the people before they say, well, look, I don't know. In this case, happily, the electoral system was sufficiently intact to allow popular discontent to show itself in the results that we got. What too often happens when autocrats come to power with through relatively democratic elections and means, is that step by step, little by little, the electoral system, the administration of elections, the drawing of constituency boundaries are eroded, the independence of them and the integrity of them. So that when the people themselves now want to do something, it's very often very late in the day, requiring more drastic action. We're going to be discussing a bit the Gen Z protests, the generation born between 1995 and 2010. How is it that after this long period of calm and quiet in Kenya, in Nepal, Bangladesh, so many others, all of a sudden, this generation of late teens and early 20s decide, look, we're not going to take it no more. We're going to be seeing what are the triggers that allow that awakening, which has taken place in so many cases, and which in fact make the period since 2020 one of the period of most upsurges in mass activity and protest. So we're going to be looking at that as well, and how does that affect how because it's important to know not just what is to be done, but crucially, how do we get from where we are to achieving what is to be done? And that's something we want to confront in future lectures. Time on us, I think.
Question.
I'm sorry?
A question from Anton.
Yeah, Anton.
Just ask you to unmute.
Anton, go ahead.
Hi, thank you, Prof. Good evening. And thank you for that presentation. I just wanted to ask you all I hope that you will in your other lectures cover the matter one of the matters that concerns me, and that is the situation with Jamaica and the international financial community and how that impacts the ability of any government to deal with the social issues in a way that can support the type of equality that you mentioned earlier. And the impact of the failure to do that can have on our democracy going forward, especially in light of the fact that the inequality means that the powerful and wealthy interests, both inside and outside of Jamaica, have disproportionate influence on the political system.
Very good. Thank you for that, Anton. We're definitely going to be confronting that, particularly in relation to Jamaica, how we got a first for the Caribbean in terms of internal control of money in elections through the Campaign Finance Regulations and the Representation of People Act. This was a 17-year advocacy, and we got it. But to get it, we had to make justifiable compromises. So there are huge loopholes, and that's one of the things we're going to be discussing. How do we close loopholes in otherwise excellent legislation and very often pioneering legislation? How do we get people to move in respect of doing what is necessary and hopefully not take another 17 years? I remember it was 1998 in the Senate, I moved a resolution that we should have campaign finance regulations, and everybody in the Senate agreed. And then, literally little or nothing happened until you kept at it. And it reminded me so much of what my late Professor Rex Nettleford said to me the day after one of our very strong student demonstrations. And I was there, he was supervising my master's thesis, and he made some remarks about submission I had made. And then he went on to say, look, Trevor, I really admire the fire and the fervor amongst you students, but I want you to recognize, never forget, that changing Jamaica is a marathon. And he went on to say, to remind me, we have never medaled in any world championships, much less Olympics, in over 1,500 meters. The marathon is 20-odd miles. So I've never forgotten that. The trouble is that when you run in a marathon, it looks like you're going around in circles. So you have to keep seeing the laps producing results and ultimately remembering the results, because they're easily forgotten in the context of so many negatives. And we're going to talk about a bit about that when we talk in the future lectures. I see Gavin as well. Thank you for that question, Anton. Gavin, my brethren. Not hearing you, Gavin.
Yeah, Prof. Evening.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for the lecture. I want to talk about and maybe bring in the role of the administrators, the civil servants in administering democracy. Their role either as neutral parties in ensuring that democracy is carried out, or in the space of, I'm going to call it cabinet capture, where the cabinet and the state becomes captured by those small forces. I wanted to talk to us a bit about how do we strengthen the civil servants in their roles there.
Well,
Thank you very much for this lecture.
Yeah, thanks for that question, Gav. Again, something we're going to be confronting more fulsomely. Here again, the training is really, really important. And one recent development gives me much hope, and that is the Management Institute for National Development, MIND. MIND has been doing good work over the years, but now Michael McConaughey-Jones has been appointed to head MIND. And I know that his perspectives on the public sector and the training that the administrators need to undergo in order to ensure that they fulfill the responsibility of not only implementing policy, but also giving advice to policymakers. And we think that's a fruitful development and one that we should have take much encouragement from. But the point that you make is crucial. It's not just the public servants in the central government, but we have now 160 public bodies and agencies. And in those public bodies and agencies, there needs to be far more awareness of responsibility and training in what is right and what is not. I'm thinking, of course, of the most recent and scandalous manifestation in the University of the West Indies Hospital. I'm looking forward to the report of Howard Mitchell to see to what extent he identifies the bases for this grave dereliction, and more importantly, the corrective measures and what can be learned by administrators of bodies that receive public funds. And of course, the civil servants as well need to stand up for their own rights and for their own interests, because their interests also coincide with ours. And I think we should all be concerned to ensure that the negotiations that are currently underway end in a fair and reasonable settlement so that they too might have some benefits from the responsibilities that they undertake. So thank you for that question. We're going to be developing it much more in future lectures. Sydney?
Yes, thanks, Joe. I'm sorry I missed your presentation, but I just wanted to find out if in future discussions you're going to touch on the matter of community councils as grassroots organizations for giving voice and influencing policy and plans. I was involved in the 1970s in trying to develop, community councils, and we saw this as being something that could enable greater accountability and responsiveness to people, and that has been swept away. I think we throw the baby with the bathwater in this case, but I think that can be of great importance for what we are facing now, and I just wondering if you plan to address that issue.
Yeah, fully agree with you, Sydney. So much so, here's another example where the efforts, the advocacy, the struggles of the past produce some results, but these results need to be built on. The fact that local government is now recognized in our constitution did not happen accidentally. It arose because of long advocacy. But you need to go beyond that, beyond recognizing in the Constitution, beyond the Local Governance Act, which in fact, for the municipal corporations, there is the equivalent of the Public Accounts Committee. And in those equivalences, it is stated that those bodies must be chaired by civil society people from the area, from the communities, from the municipality, so that here is a role given to, not by a gift, but by advocacy, to civil society at the community level to engage in determining how the budgets of the municipal corporations are spent and to advocate for the right approach. So yes, we are in a period when, consistent with what I was saying earlier on, our relative downturn in both organization, awareness, and militancy. And one of the manifestations of this is the extent to which so many community bodies, I can think of neighborhood watches, I can think of the police youth clubs, I can think of the community-based organizations, are relatively in decline organizationally compared to where they were 10 or even 7 years ago. And sometimes we point a finger, but not look at ourselves. And I ask myself, when last did I go to my neighborhood watch meeting? When did I go to the Citizens Association? So there is this concern, and there is the importance of acknowledging and recognizing that those community bodies play a critical role, and therefore, in one or another way, need to be encouraged to be revived. I think too often, both for good and not so good reasons, and to some extent effective, but not as effective as the actual face-to-face, the WhatsApp group takes the space of the community organization. And that is something we're going to be talking about as well. How far is it that social media, which is now so prevalent and really threatening the survival of traditional media, how far can social media play a more positive role in ensuring participatory democracy and citizen engagement? So thank you for raising that, and I'll certainly make sure that I have a more fulsome response to you later on. I think I'm getting a wind-up signal, and I just wanted to say thank you to everybody who took the time to be here with us this afternoon. Hopefully, next week and the 3 weeks to come, we will have a more fulsome turnout. And in any event, the presentation will be made available on a wider scale to those who are interested. So thank you very much, St. Michael, the European Union, NIA, the strength of democracy. Where is Jamaica now? How shall we make us more resilient? And how shall we ensure that backsliding does not become recession? So thank you very much. I enjoyed the session immensely.
Thank you very much, Prof. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So have a good evening, everybody.
Okay, thank you.